At 2:17 a.m. on the R-280 highway, one of Russia's most critical supply arteries inside occupied Crimea erupted into flames. In less than 11 seconds, a single Ukrainian Morrigan drone hunted down a fuel convoy carrying nearly 40,000 liters of diesel meant for Russian frontline forces. Satellite images later revealed over 7 destroyed trucks scattered across the asphalt like burning skeletons. This is no longer a battlefield. It is a systematic collapse of Crimea's survival network. Night after night, invisible drones now stalk Russian logistics from the sky, turning roads into death traps. Moscow once believed Crimea was untouchable. Morrigan is proving that even fortresses can slowly starve to death. In modern war, roads can become more important than front lines. The R-280 is not merely a highway, it is the bloodstream of occupied Crimea. Stretching across the peninsula, this vital artery forms the backbone of Russia's land logistics network, delivering a constant flow of ammunition, fuel, food, spare parts, troop rotations, repair vehicles, and air defense components. Every Russian unit on the peninsula depends on its steady pulse. Without daily resupply, even the strongest fortress grows brittle, its defenses starved of the lifeblood needed to hold ground. Before Morrigan, the R-280 stood as a proud logistics artery and a safe corridor, a concrete symbol of Russia's permanent occupation. Now it has transformed into a burning corridor, a drone hunting zone, and a psychological trap. It has become the highway to hell. At night, fuel trucks explode in brilliant fireballs that light up the sky. Drivers race with headlights low, eyes darting upward at every distant hum. Convoys scatter in panic, commanders delay movements for hours, and thick columns of black smoke rise like funeral pyres along the roadside. Soldiers who once felt protected now realize the road itself has turned against them. The asphalt that once carried their supplies now carries death from above. Ukraine is not trying to physically occupy the R-280. It does not need to. Ukraine is simply making Russia afraid to use it. The road does not need to be captured if it becomes too dangerous to trust. This leaves Russia trapped in a brutal dilemma. Option 1. Continue using the R-280 and accept daily losses of vehicles, cargo, and men. Option 2. Shift even more logistics onto the already vulnerable Kerch Bridge. Either choice tightens the noose. This is how Ukraine builds a logistics trap. It does not need to close every route. It only needs to make every route feel unsafe. Crimea is becoming the type of territory that costs more to defend than it gives back in strategic value. And once a road begins to fail, the myth behind the fortress begins to crack. For Vladimir Putin, Crimea was never just territory. It was proof that the Russian Empire could rise again. In 2014, the annexation triggered waves of patriotic euphoria across Russia. Sevastopol and the Black Sea Fleet became sacred symbols of restored imperial glory. Putin presented the move as a historic correction, the return of sacred Russian land. Crimea was more than strategic real estate. It was emotional legitimacy, a powerful narrative that justified authoritarian rule and promised renewed greatness. For millions of Russians, it embodied national revival and defiance against the West. A drone campaign on remote roads may appear tactically limited, yet it strikes at the heart of that myth. Russia cannot fully protect the territory it claims as permanently its own. The danger for the Kremlin is not only military loss, it is the collapse of the image that Crimea is permanently Russian. Crimea gives Russia critical power projection across the Black Sea. It enables naval presence, pressure on southern Ukraine, secure basing for the fleet, and ideal geography for missile launches. When Ukraine isolates the peninsula through relentless strikes on its supply lines, Russia loses more than logistics. It loses strategic posture and the ability to dominate the region. This creates a dangerous domino effect. To sustain Crimea, Russia must divert resources from Donbass, the Kharkiv direction, the southern front, and precious air defense reserves. What was meant to be a stronghold now drains strength from every other theater of war. A nuclear superpower being slowly bled by medium-range drones delivers profound international humiliation. Morrigan represents one of the most dangerous geopolitical developments for Moscow, proof that technological asymmetry can slowly erode imperial control. And perhaps this is the future of modern warfare itself. Because increasingly, wars are no longer decided only by who has more tanks, missiles, or soldiers. They are decided by who can think faster, adapt faster, and attack the systems holding entire military structures together. So tell me, do you think cheap drone warfare is permanently changing the balance between large empires and smaller resisting nations? But perhaps the most extraordinary thing about Morrigan is not only the damage it causes, but what it symbolizes. Morrigan is not simply a drone. It is a statement about how modern resistance survives. Deep inside Ukraine, a remarkable innovation ecosystem has emerged under the pressure of invasion. Engineers, defense volunteers, and small workshops work around the clock, fueled by rapid battlefield feedback loops and close coordination with the Ministry of Defense. Units like the Nemesis Brigade turn frontline lessons into deadly improvements within days. What began as desperate improvisation has become a sophisticated system of survival, a nation under siege, transforming creativity into weapons that punch far above their weight. Russia possesses nuclear weapons, hypersonic missiles, mass artillery, a large population, and centuries of imperial military tradition. Ukraine counters with something more elusive: adaptability, improvisation, decentralized innovation, symbolic naming, and a precision strike culture that refuses to play by the old rules of war. The name Morrigan is not random. By invoking the Celtic goddess of war, fate, transformation, and the battlefield crow, Ukraine adds psychological depth to every strike. The name Morrigan tells Russia that Ukraine is not merely fighting to hold ground, it is fighting to rewrite fate. Morrigan proves that cheap systems can create expensive dilemmas for a much larger foe. Drones can partially replace traditional air power roles, logistics can be attacked around the clock, and control becomes as psychological as it is physical. Morrigan proves that modern war is no longer controlled only by the richest or largest powers. It increasingly belongs to whoever adapts fastest. The signs of Russian panic are unmistakable. Night convoys now move under strict speed rules. Electronic warfare teams scramble to jam signals, fuel allocations are restricted, and every truck demands heavier escorts. An empire armed with nuclear weapons is forced to adjust its daily behavior because of relatively small, intelligent drones. The psychological toll is immense. But behind the mythology and strategy, there are still ordinary people living inside the consequences. Every strategic victory in war still leaves ordinary people living inside fear. On the streets of occupied Crimea, the impact of the campaign against the R-280 is felt in daily life. Fuel shortages cause long lines at gas stations, transport disruptions, strand workers and families, and a quiet anxiety hangs over cities and villages. People check the news obsessively, wondering if the next strike will cut power, food deliveries, or medical supplies. Mothers worry about escalation, while elderly residents and families with children try to maintain some sense of normalcy in an increasingly uncertain world. Crimea is not monolithic. Its population includes Ukrainians living under occupation, indigenous Crimean Tatars, Russian civilian migrants who arrived after 2014, local workers, and longtime residents. Each group carries different hopes and fears. No one is truly faceless in this struggle. Ukraine's strategy is militarily necessary, yet every logistics strike still expands ripples of fear across civilian life. The tragedy of war is that even morally justified resistance still spreads fear across ordinary human lives. Even so, isolating Crimea through sustained pressure on its supply lines may ultimately reduce greater bloodshed. Rather than launching a massive amphibious or ground assault that could turn the peninsula into an infantry graveyard, Ukraine is attempting to make the occupation unsustainable through precision and persistence. At its core, Morrigan represents more than destruction. It embodies creative resistance, the refusal to surrender, and the belief that power does not equal destiny. Morrigan represents the belief that smaller nations do not have to surrender simply because larger powers demand it. And perhaps that is why the story of Morrigan feels larger than one battlefield. Because behind every burning convoy and every destroyed supply line are ordinary people hoping this war eventually ends before another generation is consumed by it. And if you're still watching this documentary, it's probably because this conflict no longer feels like a simple territorial dispute. It feels like a struggle over whether power alone should decide the future of nations. And that may ultimately be why Crimea has become so important to the future of this war. The more desperately Moscow tries to hold Crimea, the more expensive Crimea becomes. Every week, Russia is forced to pour additional resources into convoy protection, reinforced air defense systems, alternative fuel routing, advanced electronic warfare equipment, road security patrols, bridge defenses, and accelerated troop rotations. What was once a triumphant outpost of expansion has become a massive resource sink, draining money, equipment, and attention that could have been used elsewhere. Crimea once symbolized Russian resurgence and territorial ambition. Now it increasingly represents strategic overstretch, a high-maintenance liability that demands constant investment simply to remain viable. The peninsula that was supposed to strengthen Russia is instead exposing its vulnerabilities in the modern battle space. Putin cannot easily abandon Crimea without shattering his carefully crafted image of strength, yet continuing to hold it requires ever-growing sacrifices. The Kremlin wanted Crimea to demonstrate Russian strength. Instead, it may increasingly demonstrate the limits of imperial power in the drone age. This does not mean Crimea will collapse tomorrow, but the strategic direction is unmistakably shifting. Russia is being forced into a long, expensive defensive posture, one where holding symbolic territory comes at a mounting cost to its broader war effort and economic stability. And perhaps that is why Morrigan matters far beyond a single highway or a single drone campaign. Morrigan may ultimately be remembered not simply as a drone, but as the sound of an empire beginning to lose certainty in its own permanence. Picture once again those burning highways at night, the dark roads of occupied Crimea lit by orange fireballs, the shadows of drones against the sky, Russian trucks engulfed in flames, their cargo of fuel and ammunition reduced to twisted metal. The same roads that once carried the confidence of conquest now bear witness to a different story. The chain is clear. The R-280 has become unsafe, forcing heavier pressure onto the vulnerable Kerch Bridge. Logistics strain grows daily. Russian commanders operate in a state of constant panic. Crimea, once a proud symbol of expansion, has become an expensive burden, and with every additional cost, the imperial myth weakens further. In the end, modern war is shaped less by brute force and more by innovation, adaptability, relentless logistics pressure, psychological control, and symbolic warfare. The most dangerous threat to large empires may no longer be invasion armies. It may be smaller enemies capable of slowly dismantling the systems holding those empires together. Morrigan is not only burning trucks, it is burning the illusion that conquest creates permanence. And perhaps that is why the skies above Crimea feel different tonight. If you want more deep geopolitical documentaries that go beyond headlines and uncover the strategy, psychology, technology, and human meaning reshaping modern warfare, stay with the channel. Because the future of conflict may no longer belong only to the largest empires. It may belong to those capable of rewriting fate itself through resilience, adaptation, and the refusal to surrender. And somewhere above the burning highways of Crimea, Morrigan continues flying, carrying with it a terrifying message to every empire that mistakes conquest for permanence.